Alright, we're going to talk about rip currents. Rip currents are the main reason for loss of life, even at Mayaro. The rip currents are easily identified by a brownish line of water going out to sea. At times, you may observe a lot of garbage or debris in one particular area, and that area is the area with the rip current. The rip currents are formed on beaches where there are waves or there are rocks or piers or any obstacle in the water. Rip currents, once a wave washes up on the beach, that body of water has to go back out to sea. And what happens is, when the wave washes up on the beach, it tends to come to one point, usually a low point on the beach. And the water will then go back out in that channel. Another wave will come, wash up on the beach, and the water again go back out in that channel. And by that action continually happening, the area where the water is going back out, it digs the sand and it gets deeper and deeper. And this area will attract more water as it gets deeper. And what it does, it gets to be a very powerful flow of water pulling seaward. And this is why we have most people losing their lives on our beaches. As the seabed is dug in the area where the rip is, it can get very deep. It can get up to, even in shallow water, you could step into a hole as deep as about 4 feet high. And suddenly you are being pulled out to sea. The rip current generally pulls people out to sea. It does not pull you under the water. It pulls you out to sea. So again, it's easily identified by the brownish line of water going out in a channel, or you may identify it by, at times, you may see waves starting to go crisscross, because with that body of water pushing against the wave, you would find the waves will now break and go in different directions. So we advise people, anytime you go to the beach, especially at Mayaro, look at the water, look for the rip currents, especially where the beach is long and there are not lifeguards throughout the entire bay. We want you to observe water conditions, look for these patterns, or look for these discolorations of the water, and avoid bathing in these areas. If you happen to be in the water and realize you're going into holes, definitely those holes lead to the main rip current area. So at first you may get a lot of small holes, eventually pulling you into the big area or to the big powerful flow to sea. Should you be caught in a rip, what could you do? There are people who cannot swim. We advise you, even though you cannot swim, some of you may be able to float. Float, get onto your back, wave your hand and try to call or attract help or attention. People who can swim, we ask you, try to swim to the sides of the rip current. In the area where the rip is, if you try to swim straight up to shore, you will only get tired and make no headway. If you try to swim to the side, it may actually be shallow enough, you may stand. If you cannot stand at any one of the sides, then try to swim to shore. Only once you've come out of the rip, then try to swim to shore, where you will make headway and reach safety. In Mayaro, what happens, especially on the low tide, when the tide is out and people come by with their family members and see a lot of these potholes, they are attracted to it and they bring their family members in and say, look, I found a nice pool, come let's bathe here. And what the unsuspecting public do not know is these holes were created by these rip currents. Now the tide is low, there's a little water in the area, and it appears to be safe to bathe. When the tide comes in, what happens? More and more water come into these areas, and then suddenly, without warning, the rip current suddenly pulls out or pull people out to sea. And this is why in Mayaro we have a number of groups of people drowning at the same time, because they carry their family into these areas, and on the change of the tide, especially on the rising tide, they are then, once there is enough water, it's now called a total death trap. You are now pulled out to sea. And even people running in to assist believe it is shallow in those areas, but in those areas it gets deeper. And a person seeing someone right there thinking they can stand up, run across to assist, and end up in deeper water than they expected, and they themselves are pulled out to sea. If anyone were to help, the best thing you can do, we advise you, avoid ever getting into these rips. Take any flotation device and throw it into the path of the rip. Hopefully it may reach the person. There are some people who can swim very strong and believe they can go into them, but even strong swimmers get into difficulties. So you can also try to get a lifeguard. Try to find out where the nearest lifeguard station is and get their attention or call for help and get them to come to the site to assist as soon as possible. So we ask you, when you come to Mayaro, especially for the Easter or any other time, please be very cautious. The water conditions could be very deceptive here. Thank you. At times, if someone were to get into difficulty in a rip current, the lifeguard, once he has identified the problem, would take his rescue aid and he would proceed in the direction of the current. This current is now pulling an individual out to sea. The lifeguard will then get himself into that part of that current as well. So the force of the current can also pull him out to sea, cutting down his reaction time to the casualty. So once the lifeguard gets into the rip, he will also be pulled by the rip and reach that person even faster. So although it is a dangerous situation, the lifeguard is trained and well trained to get in these currents and out of them as well. So he would get into it, get his casualty, and bring them out of the rip current by coming towards the side and then proceeding to shore. Again, we do know that people do feel passionate about